Tak dobrý večer. Hello. It seems like we should start as the silence came very naturally. It's my pleasure to welcome here Nicolas Bourriaud. Before we start the talk, it is important to say that the talk was actually allowed by the generous support of Autor Contemporary. Thank you, Jakub, who is just arriving right now. So you are also going to be able to see at the Autor Contemporary Gallery that is only 3 tram stops from here, from the National Gallery in front of Právnická fakulta, to see the exhibition of Nicolas that opened there on Wednesday together with Barbara Laží. It is called Timeline. I think we're going to show you some images of it soon, but please also go to see it. Nicolas is definitely one of the leading voices in contemporary art, and this at least for 3 decades. For me, he also helped to define what a curator of contemporary art nowadays means. And this is somebody who is connecting different practice related to art with writing theory, who is making exhibitions, but who is also leading and creating institutions. His very known theory books, such as Relational Aesthetics from 1998, Postprodukce from 2001, that also unfortunately remains the only one translated to Czech in 2004, his book Radikant from 2009, X-Form from 2015, and the last inclusions, the Aesthetics of the Capitalocene from 2023, are not only the kind of basic curriculum of any art student or person who is interested in contemporary art, but in my point of view can also illustrate the development of art from 1990s till nowadays. He has also, of course, curated many exhibitions that are putting in practice many of the ideas of his books. Maybe we can mention Traffic from 1995, very legendary exhibition in CAPS, Bordeaux, but also others, 15 Guangzhou Biennale, 16 Istanbul Biennale. He also established and directed, together with Jérôme Sans, Palais de Tokyo in Paris, that I think had also enormous influence on how we still consider and conceive the contemporary art center, how these spaces are being run and operated. And also served as a director of École Nationale Supérieure de Beaux-Arts in Paris between 2011 and 2015, and established the MOCO in Montpellier that he also directed, which is also a very interesting example of integrating art education into an art center, together also with some presentations of the collections. So I hope you will have the honor to listen to his talk tonight, and so now the talk will follow, and after Nicolas is finished, we will give space to your questions. I will moderate the discussion. Hope there will be many, and the voice is for you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Michel, and the National Gallery to welcome me today for this pleasure of having an occasion to talk and discuss with you later with the artists, art lovers of Prague. And I will start actually the whole speech I will make starts from the exhibition, which is exactly nearby, Timeline. And yeah, as you see later, maybe you will get some images from the show. But anyway, it's important to talk about it. Images are worth if they can be actually dialogue, if you can enter into dialogue with them. So that's what I'm going to try. So this exhibition starts from, the story starts in 1905. There's an old anarchist geographer from France who then is exiled in Brussels because of his political activities, who publishes a huge book called Man on Earth. Today it would be called, I guess, Humanity on Earth, I guess. And the young artist who's in charge of illustrating it is František Kupka. And that's another story we could develop, but actually those are almost the last figurative drawings it has, because from this book he's entering into the path that will lead him to abstract painting. So the book by Élisée Reclus turns around two groundbreaking intuitions. The first one is the idea, which is at the time and in Europe completely groundbreaking, is the idea that planet Earth is not only a decor where we live, but a living organism. And it will actually have a huge echo in what is called the Gaia hypothesis in the 1980s, the theory by Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock, who actually show scientifically that the planet is not inert. No, it has an agency. It does live, actually, and it's not only a block upon which humanity is playing. So that's the first really important idea. And the second one, which is displayed in the Bull book, is the idea that human history and human settlements is inseparable from their ecosystems. Ecosystems make history. That's the second idea, which is super important. And these ecosystems, it means also terrestrial, of course, physical geography, but also cosmological, also the atmospheric, in a way. We all depend on those elements. Of course, we say it's a groundbreaking new theory for the time. It was written for the first time in 1857, but only a new theory for the Western audience. Because obviously, in the ancient times, in the pre-modern era, many people thought that way. So it's, in a way, the idea of Élisée Reclus is a way to come back to pre-modern times. And that's exactly where we are at the moment, examining again everything that the Western civilization tried to destroy, actually, in the last 2 centuries. So, on the same line, actually, we talk about František Kupka is, of course, one of the first abstract painters in the 20th century. But abstraction never stopped to exist, since the Lascaux cave, in the superior Paleolithics. You have abstract paintings in the caves, actually. And the paleontologists didn't care so much about them because they didn't integrate the idea of abstract art, actually, in their way of thinking. But now, it's obvious that abstraction has never ceased to exist. If you take even the tantric monochromes in India in the 17th century, they are abstract, as far as I know. If you take mandala, it's abstract, etc., etc. But I could make a huge review of abstract paintings before Kupka, Mondrian, and Kandinsky. But we, Western people, we write history, so that's quite convenient. But I do believe that this evolution, the evolution of Kupka, comes from the book, actually. The more I'm studying it, the more for me it's obvious. Because what does, and you will see that in the illustrations that are in the exhibition, for example. I don't know if there are some behind me, maybe later. Because Reclus is proceeding through abstractions, the origins, culture, growth, etc. All those abstract ideas actually lead to abstract painting for me. That's absolutely obvious. But let me take a very long and deep historical detour to understand the stakes, actually, and also the stakes, what is at stake in 21st century art. And we must think in terms of, we must think the long term, the long duration, actually. Stop being obsessed by the everyday news and try to think, like the artist in the exhibition, the long term. And to really proceed to this long-term way of thinking, I'm going to start even with the birth of art itself, actually. The lower Paleolithic times where art actually appears as a human manifestation. And it is a huge event, the birth of art as an activity into human settlements in the Paleolithics, because art requires three faculties which are determining. The first one, the most known one, is the projection of a mental image into matter, whatever this matter is. And it means the will to communicate. And the idea of playing with signs, with forms, by distancing yourself from reality. At its origin, the emergence of art signifies a functional reorganization of the mind of the Homo sapiens, leading to a new mode of thinking that involves the ability to produce analogies, the ability to produce metaphors, equivalences, and to imagine fictional worlds. That's all about distance, actually. We're not stuck to reality. We project ourselves into other worlds. And this faculty, this threefold faculty, actually created the human species as it is, as we are now, actually. It's a cognitive revolution. That's the way most paleontologists talk about it, in other words. But because within the space opened by art, that the human species found the means of its survival. In short, it developed and differentiated itself from other species through one notion, distance. By inventing throwing, for example, that is an action at distance. By projecting its needs into tools beyond his or her own body. And that's the way Homo sapiens managed to survive among predators that were much better armed than themselves, actually. We had no chance, actually, as such. Projection, distance, saved us. The art historian Aby Warburg, one of my favorites, wrote, I quote, "Consciously introducing a distance between oneself and the external world is undoubtedly what we can designate as the founding act of human civilization." Meaning, by creating this sphere of tools that interpose themselves between us and the external world, a kind of protective and projective sphere, humans ensured the success of their own species. And among these tools, that's where I wanted to go, art played a fundamental role. It allowed the human species to take an additional step back from their ecosystem by projecting themselves into fiction, by creating perspectives through figures and symbols that led them to think about the universe, think about it, rather than merely evolving in it. This specific sphere is the sphere of the sensible. We know that an image has no body, but it needs a medium to exist. It's a painting on the wall, it's a stone slab to engrave, or whatever. And it necessarily arises from a displacement also, again distant, displacement. We capture the image through imagination or memory, and we translate it into matter using whatever tool, lines, colors, etc. So one could define the human species by its development through projecting forms into the distance. inventing, in a way, a kind of mental spear or arrow, whatever you want. But anyway, it's a projectile. Art is a projectile. Yet what is really characteristic of our current era, that has been designated as the Anthropocene, the historical and geological moment in history where the humankind has an action upon the deep matter of Earth. It's in a way what we're living now. It's a return to the times where humans, whose survival and development are based on distance, are reminded, are on the verge of abolishing this distance under the weight of a mass of equipment that now occupies all available space in the biosphere. The 20th century world, the one we're living in, is cluttered. When media, when tools, when all the technical extensions of the human being take up more space on Earth than the living sphere, which is exactly what's going on now, it's when it's filling the space in which humans could project themselves, we are brought back to the saturated space of predators that early humans were facing. When they had to struggle to find their place on Earth, before developing this technology of distance that we talked about. With the appearance of this huge layer of objects, huge layer of human artifacts all over the planet, another process is beginning. The transmission of experience between generations, in other words, the emergence of culture. Social relations and group memory could now be mediated by objects and images. Among the Homo sapiens, as the paleontologist Jean-Paul Demoule noted, I quote, each new individual finds at birth a set of material objects that they must learn to reproduce, which will constitute the identity of their group and become part of their own. This relay, through objects and images, artifacts, formed the primitive stock of human culture, which would continue to grow, actually, endlessly. And it's growing now to, again, this image of saturation. We have today 3 billion images circulating on the social media every day. 3 billions. Nobody can watch them, actually. So we're reaching a point where, for the first time in the history of humankind, we produce more images than we can see, actually. Another fact that is corresponding to this is the fact that in 2001, the last 2 spots that were not mapped were mapped by satellites, actually. They were, if I remember well, in Borneo. The last, what was called terrae incognitae, actually. So the 21st century began with, for the first time in humankind again, we had a perfect and complete knowledge of the geography of the planet. And it was not so much discussed, in a way, but it was predicted in 1932, if I remember well, by the French writer Paul Valéry, who was talking about the times of the finite world is coming. And he was already addressing this issue, where every piece of land on this planet is into the repertoire. Actually, we know every centimeter of the globe. But let's come back on something. Why are those objects, for transmission, those artifacts are so important? Because they enable the survival of human species, as I said, and because the human species, I insist on that, had no physical quality that could have allowed it to perform this miracle that we're still living, because we are utterly defenseless, actually, compared to the most of the animal population, during the Paleolithics. And to understand why this last point is crucial, we're going to make a little step in time and talk about the Greek mythology. An art critic and curators are like the griot in the Western Africa. They are supposed to tell the story of the village every time differently. And that's what I'm doing actually, in a way, at every exhibition or every lecture, telling the story of the village I live in, which is called art, in a different way. And today I'm going to start with the Greek mythology by Hesiodus, who tells the story of the origins of the world in the cosmogony. So Zeus, the god of gods in Greek mythology, entrusted the task of organizing life on Earth to two brothers, two titans, Prometheus and Epimetheus. One was in charge of logistics, and the latter had to assign specific qualities to all animal species. Epimetheus: sharp claws, sharp teeth, swift legs, solid armors, fins, wings, etc. Each species was initially endowed with effective attributes, all except one. Because for Epimetheus, having exhausted his stock of prostheses, realized that one remained at the bottom of the bag, the human species. And in a way it's kind of explained by the Greek language, because Epimetheus means the guy who reflects afterwards, actually epi, afterwards. So humans, with whom Zeus, by the way, had a difficult relationship, the humans entered the world devoid of any equipment. We're naked, fragile, slow, without means of defense. We had no prospect of survival at all. So what Greek mythology teaches us, and that's an important point for what's going to follow, is that humanity was built from a lack, something missing. And that's super important. So it was then that Prometheus, the brother, decided to intervene and decided to help the human species by giving them what Zeus, who was the master of lightning, considered his most precious tool, fire. It was what the gift of Prometheus to humanity. By learning to master this gift, humans developed their main asset, which is directly coming from fire, and which is called techne. Techniques, technology. No. So techne was the way we got out of this trap, actually. The set of arts and techniques, because for the Greeks it was the same, actually. Arts and techniques were absolutely equal. So the myth of Prometheus and Epimetheus defines humanity by its shortcomings, by lack. And this void is inscribed in a way in our DNA. And this void, this lack, this absence that is original, allowed us to project ourselves, to desire, and to fill the distance separating us from reality with science, and also, of course, to compensate, I'm insisting on it, our physical weakness by inventing projectiles. So it's important to understand that this lack is not accidental. It is structural. And today, and that's the point, because that comes back to the title of this speech, technology, in the form of robotics and artificial intelligence, proposes to remedy this lack. That is, to complete humanity with tools that are so perfected that they present now themselves as replacements more than tools or prostheses. They are like improved versions of ourselves, in a way. They think better, they calculate better. Now they can produce images at our place, also, by calculation. They no longer extend our organisms like the tools of the prehistoric, during prehistoric times, but they attempt to substitute for it, and the precision is quite important. Our memories can now be stored on any device. The new artifacts, they no longer make us dream because we no longer project ourselves through them. Instead, they attempt to fill us, to satisfy the lack that is central, actually, to humanity, with ersatz desires, let's say. That is, products, which are the descendants of the first projectiles. But now that we have entered this strange, the definition of this strange activity called art, let us return to Kupka and Élisée Reclus. In Man and Earth, 1905, again, there was this strong sentence, which is, physical geography is, so to speak, the history of humanity made visible. And what's the most important geographical event of our times? It's what the scientist Paul Crutzen defined in 2001 by inventing the term Anthropocene, actually, which is, I recall it again, the historical moment when the accumulated activities of humankind have an impact on geography itself, not only on history, but on geography. So we are facing two crises, and this crisis that we're entering into, I would call it globally the crisis of the human scale, because we no longer know what's the scale of the humans. We are at the same time super small, and the toys of forces that actually exceed our power, and at the same time we have the collective power to modify geography. So where are we in between those two terms? That's what I call the crisis of the human scale. Because this crisis is twofold. First, we have a crisis in relation to our environment. But is it really an environment? Because the word environment means, and it's very Greek also, by the way, the stage where the human actions take place, actually. That's environment. So that's already ideological. A crisis in relation to our ecosystems, I would say. But we also have a crisis with our own equipment, our machines, our tools, actually. And all the debates around artificial intelligence turn around this crisis of how do we handle that. There was the first artist in Greek mythology was called Daedalus. His reputation was to build sculptures that were so perfect that you could confuse them with human beings. And that's interesting, because at the very beginning of art, you have this idea of a kind of replacement of the human being by a perfectioned model, actually, by something that would actually exceed and be superior to us at some point. It's what Aristoteles was calling the automaton in Greek, the automat. And it seems that today we are surrounded by automat. In our daily life, we have more interactions with machines than with humans, many times. Like cell phones, we can have Siri or Alexa, or talking to chatbots. Elevators talk to you in the tube. Sometimes doors open automatically. We live in an automated world completely. It's the new landscape we're living in the landscape when machines mediate human relationships, as if we were actually controlled by an external force, but without even noticing it every day. Our main tool for communicating, for learning, for interacting with the world is the internet. And online today, you have more machine activity than human activity at the surface of the planet. You know, since 5 or 6 years, actually, it's clearly the number of activities is dominated by the machines, by the bots, and algorithms, or ad servers, etc. So we're actually controlled by an online activity where we are a minority now, actually, as human beings. How could not we start being a bit freaked out by this? Even contemporary artifacts now observe the world at our place. You have the metaphor of the QR code, for example. QR codes are images which are produced by machines to be read by other machines, actually, so that the human gaze has no role to play at all in this process. If you follow GPS, you know, when you walk around the streets of Prague, for example, it's exactly the same. You are confronted with, you are decoding mentally something, but you're not watching anything. The gaze has been eliminated. And in a way, art has a role to play in this, and it's not outside this situation at all. There's a fascinating book by the anthropologist Alfred Gell, actually, who published 10 years ago. I'm quoting him. The immediate other in a social relationship does not have to be another human being. Social agency can be exercised relative to things, and social agency can be exercised by things, and also animals. It just happens to be patently the case that persons form what are evidently social relations with things. And in a way, artworks are part of this world of artifacts. And we have now another layer of this fact with what is called, could be called the automatic alterity, or the automatic otherness, actually, when people actually talking to machines, to artificial intelligences. That's the progress of the automaton in our lives. And because now they can not only remember things for us, but they also can think for us. So that's something which is an anthropological term also, is the fact that human gaze becomes a minor activity. It might even become a kind of luxury, actually, and then we would all gather in art galleries to exercise our gaze, which would not have any other room in society actually to be exerted. The rest of the time we would be decoding, but not watching, but not observing, not scrutinizing things. In one of his last books, Jacques Derrida attempted to trace the boundaries between the human and the animal. Important to think the relationship between the humans and today's robots is to make a detour through animals. So Derrida begins with a personal anecdote. One morning he steps out of the shower and finds himself naked in front of his cat. That's the beginning of the book, actually. And then suddenly he's that, wait, I'm have a kind of pudor. Why? It's just a cat, etc. And that's the story of this book, which is a philosophical analysis of our relationships through the philosophers of all times with animals. And he recalls that René Descartes, the French 17th century philosopher, compared animals to machines, actually. He thought that animals were responding to external stimuli with automatisms dictated by instinct. That's exactly the way we could talk about artificial intelligence now, actually, by the way. And then he quotes Martin Heidegger, who wrote, "The stone is wordless, weltlos. The animal is poor in world, weltarm. And the human being is world-forming, weltbildend." It's interesting to see that the stone actually is considered as wordless, and that's what differentiates the stone from organisms, let's say. And one could say that artificial intelligence is wordless. It has no world. So what is a world, actually? It's exactly what we're going to try to respond to from now. Any chatbot, actually, if you talk to ChatGPT, it responds to the stimuli we send it with what are called predictions, actually. It's predictive. It's not rationalizing, actually, it's predicting. It's simply capable of predicting what we expect of it, not of responding. And response is the key, actually. It reacts, but it does not answer. Though the question is this one: when humans rely on machines for their memory, or to analyze a situation, or to give them advice on their behavior, should I drop my boyfriend or girlfriend or not, etc., do they not become poor in world, as Heidegger was talking about, or even worldless? It is in front of art that anyone can become world-forming, the third term used by Heidegger. And to understand what it means, we have to define what could be called an ecological thought today, or an ecosystemic thought. Because in art, we measure ourselves, when we are going to visit an exhibition, we measure ourselves against world formers, actually. People who are able to constitute a small world, in an artwork. And art is what allows us to move from an automated landscape to what I call a relational landscape, where you engage with other subjects, not with objects. It's possible that the 21st century, the human of the 21st century has become out of soil, in a way. Not only wordless, but out of soil, because we evolve in an increasingly abstract world, actually. That's what the French philosopher Bruno Latour was talking about, the necessity to land, between brackets, land again on the planet. Because we have been living, according to him, in the last 3-4 centuries, in a totally, without landing, without leaving actually the physicality of this planet for a world of abstractions. Landing again on our planet would mean undoing and deconstructing the process of automation and mathematization of the world. Life continuously produces diversity. That's a general and universal law. But if evolution is a natural process of producing differences, which we know since Darwin, it clashes with the industrial process of production, which is here to standardize and separate, which it is here to calculate and uniformizing. the world. Let's take the example of agricultural monoculture, for example. Isabelle Stengers, a Belgian philosopher, wrote, I quote, "Destruction was carried out in the name of progress by enforcing a right of property that is above all a right to exploit, extract, abuse, and undo all interdependencies." And I insist on this last thing, undoing all interdependencies, which are today actually taken into account by what's called permaculture, for example. Ecological thought would be taking those interdependencies into account against the abstract monoculture, which is the idea of reducing the soil to a simple surface, actually, eliminating all interactions, eliminating all animal-vegetal interactions. Abstract monoculture is by definition what we could call a world-destroying process. Here, world, and it gives us a definition of what it means to be worldless. World means interdependencies, networks of relationships between multiplicity of elements. On the other hand, automatism, the same as monoculture, is oriented towards a single consequence, which is profit. Ecosystemic thought is based on care and attention to think. It's a way of envisioning the milieu, actually, in the biological meaning of this world. As Isabelle Stengers says, a milieu would be a fabric of interdependencies that produce both bodies and relations to the milieu. And she talks about an art of practices that create or maintain relations. I would define art today as a kind of compost. Because in a compost, identities dissolve and new compositions become possible. That's the moment we are at, historically speaking. We have the choice either to go to the pure abstraction of a mathematized, calculated world, or into a world that could actually produce new relationships, produce new complexities, and would go on into what is the logics of evolution, which is difference, multiplicities. So today it's important to understand the significance of the theory of evolution, and I want to go back on this, because it allows us to think about the automated world we are entering. So let me make a little parenthesis on Charles Darwin. In October 1836, returning from his long trip aboard the Beagle, the boat, Charles Darwin settled in the countryside of Kent. He would never travel again, by the way. He was only 28 years old, and he found himself amid an impressive mass of scientific information that he had collected from around the world and struggling to formulate its overall logics, actually. He first published a memoir, The Voyage of the Beagle, which is a meticulous account of his 5 years of geological and botanical discoveries along the coast of South America, and then in Polynesia and Australia. But he was a bit overwhelmed by the scope of his findings. So he would spend the rest of his life trying to perfect his classification systems and organizing them. But as early as 1836, after reviewing his observations for the first time, there was a general idea emerging to organize all this material. The image of species that were gradually modifying themselves. And this idea imposed itself on him almost like against his will. as he says. It is, I quote Darwin, as if I were confessing a crime. The fact that this notion of evolution only appears in the 6th edition of the book, actually. More precisely, it talks about descent with modification. But it must be said, and repeated and said strongly, that this theory directly challenged the human narcissism, which is always quite strong. Because humanity, before Darwin, saw itself as a concept invented by God. And suddenly, after Darwin, it found itself descending from the ape. Some are actually still struggling with the idea. There was an encyclical by the Pope Benedict XVI, actually, reaffirming that the human being is the fruit of God's thought. That is, if you translate it in philosophical terms, it would mean it's a concept. And it would be miraculously preserved from the laws governing the organic world. An essence, if you want. So this idea that humanity is an essence, and that an omnipotent God spent an entire week creating essences, archetypes. If you believe that anything that differs from them, from those archetypes, is anomalous, actually. Consequently, the very idea of divergent or different individuals is unacceptable. And they must be forcibly brought back to the established norm. Anti-Darwinism is the belief in an immutable and definitive norm. Opponents of modern art fought it in the name of tradition, and it's exactly the same idea. The problem was to accept or not divergent gazes. And remember, the law of evolution goes towards more and more diversity. So Darwin was the instigator of the thought of diversity. His work allowed the notion of diversity, of difference, to take root in the art of his time. And it's not coincidence if The Origin of Species, the big theoretical book by Darwin, was exactly contemporary with Impressionism, which would find its full expression in the 1870s. Because it theoretically, I don't know what happens behind me, but it theoretically authorizes and justifies difference, deviation from norms, the divergent gaze on reality. That's a difference. That's all. So also, the same people believe in transhumanism assisted by computers. They believe in the omnipotence of the machine. That would be the only thing capable of rivaling the divine. So it's pretty interesting to see that today, actually, computer science is strangely equated with God and this idea of omniscience. The theory of the evolution of species, which forms the basis of modern what's called zoonomia, the study of the laws of life. And what lies at its core, which comes to disrupt Western knowledge, generates a new vision of the relationship between form and time. Because beyond natural history, Darwin scientifically posits a theory that contradicts the biblical narrative, but also opposes the philosophy, all the Western philosophy derived from Plato, which is based on the idea of essence, actually. The Origin of Species, even if it's a book of natural history, contains a general theory of form that profoundly, I think, alterated our view of art history. Darwin asserts metamorphosis as the principle of all morphology. Every form, you see, is the product of a metamorphosis. And a species is nothing more than the transient, stabilized state of a permanent succession of metamorphoses. This actually is a lesson, I think. This means that the species we believe to be immutable are merely transient states arising from a biological root. It means also that the forms we see are marked by constitutive instability. In short, a form is not an eternal idea, but it's an evolving organism. The vitalism of Darwin authorizes artistic modernism at the end of the 19th century because it dynamites the very notion of permanence, and it attacks the concept of stability on which Western art was founded. After Darwin, Western art could no longer believe in the permanence of values or the solidity of forms, and that's the history of 20th century. Essences against transformation, being against becoming. We accept or not that nothing is here once and for all. The living exists only by continually transforming itself, diversifying, inventing new functions and new tools. It's a process of expansion, as opposed to the process of reduction, I would say. Today, objects composed of very rare minerals are at the core of the world economy. And those rare minerals actually are used to think for us. They enter into the composition of computers, for example, every computer. Their components, the very matter through which they express those thoughts, come from the inanimate world, towards which the death drive directs us, in a way. There's an obscure nostalgia for non-existence that governs the unconscious of the transhumanist advocates today. And war is one of the expressions of this death drive that surrounds us today. There's a life drive struggling against the death drive. We know that since Sigmund Freud, at least. And this death drive can be defined as an obscure nostalgia for inertia, an unconscious desire to return to the mineral state. The Darwinian revolution in the 19th century was, above all, the eruption of deep time into a conception of form. It is the idea of the power of time to bring forth, from the repetition of minuscule changes, events of an entirely different nature and scale. The minuscule is the key to understand the long term. And the discovery of prehistoric art from the 1870s in Altamira and Lascaux would further amplify this intuition, inaugurating modern art that would not exist, according to me, without the discovery of prehistoric art at the end of 19th century. In the human world, art could be a kind of equivalent of the concept of natural evolution. It's a process of diversification of forms and mentalities, which opposes itself against the forces that are governed by this death drive that I'm talking about, which could be actually summed up in two families: automatization, authoritarianism. Automatic, algorithmic piloting is, to my opinion, based on a totalitarian idea. Because if you examine the authoritarian ways of thinking in the 20th century, they all share something, including some declarations by J.D. Vance and some ideologists, amongst the Trump power, they all share something crucial. They refuse the idea of a lack that we were mentioning at the beginning. They deny the incompleteness of the subject. They deny fragility, doubt, weakness. Radicality is the solidity of the root, actually. Branches and leaves must be pruned, torn away. The current radicalization of masculinism, for example, is inseparable from the triumph of automation, to my eyes. It claims an athletic and robust body, strength, compactness. That's the fascist dream, actually, if you think about it. A compact body, no flaws, no lacks. It exalts the block to the detriment of sinuous or frayed lines. Identity blocks, the black rectangle of the Kaaba, Trumpian triumphal arches. They all are the compact masses that express this absolute and radical belief. And that is why, for example, the LGBTQ plus issues have become such a central topic in contemporary totalitarian rhetoric. Because the uncertain bodies, queerness, transgender people, inhabited by any type of lack or flaw or deviance from the norm, weakened by the non-correspondence between their biological gender and their mental gender, for example, they all oppose by their very presence the massive thinking of autocrats, which tends towards simplification and the idea of the block. Authoritarian regimes always move towards the idea of integral ableism, validism. So, identities must be absolute, clear, rigid, validated by a social body that is just uniform as compact. Benito Mussolini defined fascism with the formula, I quote, "Everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state." And this formula literally designates what is a block. This hatred of incompleteness is found in representations, in images that leave no void, where the trace of the hand itself is perceived as a guilty hesitation, as a zone of uncertainty, as the fragility of the unfinished, for example. And that's the rhetorics of 1930s fascisms against modern art, by the way. You can check that, it's everywhere. Actually, we could sum it up in one sentence. Fascism would like to cancel Epimetheus. It actually sides with Zeus. It prefers to eliminate the human rather than to see the imperfect, incompletely equipped, deviant beings evolving within it. The passion for the smooth and the clean, this hatred of incompleteness, as Nietzsche said, human to human, it finds in technology and algorithms its most valuable allies, because they provide the objective foundation, the infrastructure on which a universe whose subjectivity will play no role can be deployed. And it's funny to see that once again, everything is at stake in ancient Greece. So fascinated by the invention of para-human beings, before whom it should bow, and in whose presence its imperfections appear as defects, the human species is looking for a perfect order within which reality itself could submit. Mathematics. submission, because the human species seems to have always needed a kind of master, a celestial reflection that would be greater than itself. In the eyes of the gods, whose absolute perfection is reflected in the status of Daedalus or Praxiteles, the flesh of which it is made, our flesh is nothing but rot. If you look at the art of the Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, North Korea today, for example, there's one thing that's striking is the idea of the parade, the marches, and the aesthetization of the masses, which are symbols of a general will to order the social body, to automatize the social, actually. Not composed of multiple particles, but of disciplined masses. Nazi art, for example, or socialist realism, they have a common point. It's the end of incompleteness. The image has to appear as a block. It's something that we could actually discuss about for 1 hour more with examples, but it's the core of this aesthetics. So totalitarianism is above all a logistics of human bodies, which proceeds through, and that's my conclusive point, through successive devitalizations. The reduction of relationships we have, actually, the mediation of them through machines, the reduction of our relationship to our ecosystems, our soils, our surroundings, our milieu, which is actually, if you look at it, constituted of thousands of different lives, actually. We are not a block, our body is not a block. And the first reason of it is that we are actually sheltering millions of bacteria, for example. No? We are more like shepherds for life. Actually, we are just dialoguing with them every day. So yes, Élisée Reclus was right. Physical geography is, so to speak, the history of humanity made visible. And we have to be careful that the history of humanity seems to escape from this physical geography, going towards abstraction and calculation. And art is what reminds us that all those living interactions that surround us, actually, it's a fabric of interdependencies, or the best way I ever encountered to make those relationships, those interdependencies, those complexities visible. And I would end with a sentence by Hannah Arendt that sums up the whole speech I just did. The goal of totalitarianism is not only to suppress political opponents, but also to isolate individuals from one another and erase all forms of social organization and solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It has been very dense and there have been many images, so please do not hesitate and do not be scared to pick up any of those and ask questions, please. Is there some brave person who is willing to go first? Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your speech and talk. To use your paraphrase with the village, if I may, and I'm very happy occupant of the same village. I was just wondering, because I feel that in the last few years the village lives next to the town, that is kind of feeling that it's subsidizing the village and feels that its voice is not represented there. So would you have kind of some thought, and I know that your experience, especially in Montpellier, which was similar here, when the ideas came that you should exhibit like street art or something. Similar thing happened here, by the way. And for me it would be interesting to hear your thought about how the village should learn to maybe better communicate with the town and maybe convince the majority of the time, who are the working class people, to kind of start to communicate with them and help them understand each other more.
Maybe the question would be less to how to communicate, but how to texture things in a different way, actually. If you took the example of my work in Montpellier, where I was called by the mayor to, in 2015, actually, to constitute a new institution. And at the moment he was thinking, oh, maybe the best thing would be to do the Bilbao effect, building a huge architectural gesture that would be a kind of logo, actually. And my way of thinking was different. I was thinking, but you have many places which are interesting, but they are working separately from each other. So my aim was to gather those elements. For example, I included the art school in the art center, so the students could participate to the exhibitions, and all the artists coming to Montpellier for the exhibitions were intervening in the art school, etc., etc. It was a really virtuous circle. But my idea was never to build something new. Just use well what you have, you know, and coordinate them, you know, give them a kind of common energy. So here you see, it's not communicating, it's texturing, creating a texture, giving a new texture to what exists. And I think that could be a key to answer your question. Maybe the village doesn't need to communicate more or communicate better with the town, but there should be a kind of intersection which transforms slowly the town into the village. It's taken from concrete examples. That's,
Great. Somebody to follow up? Maybe I can step in then. I think that the question, as much as your answer, is for me raising the question of art's autonomy. That's also a question that interested me a lot. And do I understand it well that somehow, by also in my reading of your work, by claiming the relationality, you somehow detour this question of art's autonomy? Would it be possible to say, because you spoke about the question of distance that is constituting the art? Of course, the Western modern art is constituted by this autonomy, by a certain isolation, when we go back to Friedrich Schiller, etc., etc. But maybe we are just imagining this distance somehow, right? Between, as he said, between the village and the city, right? Or is your answer such as that the relation is there? Sorry for a bit simplifying, but
you're pointing out I think what, in my eyes, is the main debate of the 20th century, actually. All the avant-gardes, all the modernist artists were talking about the autonomy of art. You know, Adorno wrote a lot about it. You know. But at the same time, they were also all envisioning the dissolution of art within daily life. You know, it was the dream of the Bauhaus. It was the dream of the Situationists. You know, it was the dream of the Surrealists. You know. So it's a kind of tension that can become a paradox at some point, because you can say art is autonomous, and at the same time you want it to integrate the everyday life. You want it to integrate the socius. So this tension makes 20th century art for me. But I don't think we can still think in those terms today. I'm not sure that artists are very much concerned by the idea that their art is autonomous from what, by the way. You can ask ourselves the questions. It's autonomy. Is it something we have to fight for? And which concrete situations would we need? Artists would need to fight for autonomy. I don't think in terms of autonomy.
Maybe to follow up, then still I would, let's say, answer that you are not claiming that there is no distance, right, between art and real life. This is also, again, one of the questions of autonomy, but I think that often maybe artists feel that there should be less distance between their art and a kind of often political impact of their work. So how would you consider, and sorry I'm asking very difficult and abstract questions, but...
Well, you're talking about something which is very specific, which is the way an artwork or an artist's work can be actually swallowed in a way by ideology or swallowed by a specific political discourse. But it has happened in all times. Actually, it's not specific to our period of time, unfortunately. But even the word distance is here difficult to use. Art, visual arts, derived from painting, sculpture, installation, are not massive. That's why they can actually survive in even theocratical regimes, actually, because they are not massively seen. And that's maybe something lucky, I have to say. Because art doesn't transform masses, it transforms people one by one, actually. So it's small amounts. But those people are maybe more deeply transformed by real encounter with an artwork that really moves them and makes them think than if they were assisting a concert or whatever. It's more intimate, I would say, the experience we have with the artwork. So it's also very often under the radar, and that's a luck, actually, for in many regimes.
Definitely. Please.
Yeah, it seems that diversity is one of the crucial terms in your thinking. Mm-hmm. And what is the relation, or what does it mean for diversity and artificial intelligence? What is the relation between diversity and...
Well, artificial intelligence, gathers data. It starts from what has been already thought, actually. And it cannot, it just predicts formally, but it doesn't predict anything that's not already into its data. So it's the opposite of the artist, in a way. And if we talk about mathematics, there's a number in modern mathematics which expresses exactly what I think about art. It's the number omega. Omega is the sum of all numbers plus 1. And that's what art is about. It's the plus 1. It's what you don't expect, what you would have never thought about, what is not wanted by the audience, because the audience has no idea that it does exist, it could exist. That's this white whale that we all are chasing, actually. And I think that makes life in the village of art worth living. Plus 1, the omega. That's what art, the formula of art. So yeah, it's the opposite of diversity, Noemi, to answer the question. Yeah.
But artificial intelligence is taking more and more is taking a more and more important role in our life, and this is why I think that this is a dangerous for this our idea of diversity and what we can do about it. This is my
what
question.
we can do about it?
Yeah. This is the big question. Yeah.
Shit, no, I'd love to be able to answer you actually, but
how we can challenge this danger?
Yeah, we can put limits, but the limits mean political will. Actually, if there's no political will, there will be no limits. No, it's.
But not only political will, what we can do about it as an artist or theoretician.
What you can do is ignore it. But I'm afraid that we won't be able to, or use it in your way. But knowing what it means, it can be helpful for some small things for me. But like translating.
My question is a little bit similar to Naomi. I was really, thank you for the lecture. I was thinking when you said how humankind invented the distance, the capacity or faculty of imagination as something that divided us from animals and made us help us be stronger than what we could physically. So there was something very abstract in the beginning of thinking of the knowledge, and that's how we invented the tools. But then the tools kind of took over, and now you described all the machines and all the automatization and all the technical devices as an enemy, sort of, as something we are losing. We are diving in and losing our capacity to imagine again. Do you feel there is a way? How can we use all those tools that we invented in a way that will not go through this kind of just automatization, or that will enable us again to create, not just be lost in the copying or not thinking.
Yeah, good question. Makes me think of what Wittgenstein was saying. Don't look for the meaning, look for the use. How do we use those things? It's much more important than what they mean, in a way. And the problem is maybe not the technical innovations but in themselves, than their accumulation. And accumulation is a way to use things. It's if you store hundreds and hundreds of things in one room at some point, it's a different use than if you display them or dispatch them. So, yeah, the use is the key, I think.
So what kind of use do you suggest?
Well, it would need, for every object, a specific lecture, I think. Because it's not that easy, unfortunately. Well, otherwise, we would know immediately, what to do. But it seems that we are now a bit overwhelmed by our own productions, actually, and that's the specificity of our times, I think. It's not by random that the Frankenstein, the myth of Frankenstein, for example, by Mary Shelley, the book, it has been regularly actually remade recently, but I think it makes sense actually, because it's exactly the story of Frankenstein. It's how technology escapes to our control, actually. And for example, there was an exercise in the military in America with artificial intelligence where it was programmed to fight against specific invaders, etc. At some point, they wanted to interrupt the experience, and they asked the AI to stop. But the AI refused to stop because it actually interpreted the order as coming from the enemy. So it went on and went on and went on. There was no way to stop it. I'm afraid it might be a metaphor that we talk about again in the next decades.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll speak next. I'm very grateful that I can speak to you. So let me give a little speech before I'll start to ask my question.
Who's speaking?
It's pretty long. So when you talked about the artificial intelligence, I was really interested in that topic because I started to notice from the people like my age that they are so consumed that they practically formed a bond with the machine, not just like the AI or like the internet in general. And when you cut that bond from them, I think they'll just fall deeper into the trap, because when you cut something that you already formed a bond with it, then there's the emptiness that everyone fears, because it's the greatest fear of all, I think, to not be able to connect with something or someone. And I noticed that people seek other people, but in a way that is like infected by the internet, because they expect everyone to be perfect. And that is the downfall, I think. So how to stop filling that void, or how to not take the void as something negative but something positive, because from the void can come inspiration, I guess.
Well, you just brilliantly summed up all the problems that it generates, actually. But really, it's very complete, I would say. And this bond you're talking about, which is very important, absolutely, marks the difference between a tool and a substitute, I would say. A tool, you know how to use it. It can be anything, technological tool or the most simple tool. But what we're talking about here, what you are mentioning, is not the use of tools. It's the cohabitation with entities which tend to substitute to us, actually. And this difference between substitution and usefulness, which is the main problem, actually, today. We have been grown up having a teddy bear or a doll, or this kind of doudou in French, this kind of toys that you transfer your emotions upon, actually, when you're 2 years old. The relationship we have sometimes with artificial intelligence is not far from this, actually. We project, actually, because we tend, naturally, as human beings, we are trying to project emotions towards objects, actually. And then you have more sophisticated objects that can pretend to be your mother, your father, your friend, your lover, whatever, and it's much more dangerous, I would say. But how to escape that? My God, it's a super complex question, because it's anchored in our brains, actually, this ability to project emotions on objects. And maybe again, it would be interesting to make a more complex review of it, integrating animals, for example, because we would not say the same thing about a pet dog or a pet cat, or etc. So maybe we should include robots, in a way, in this sphere, and try to horizontalize a little bit this field of relationships.
Okay, thank you for your lecture. I'm actually relating to the question before, and I'm having particular doubts about the Heideggerian parts. When you said that the minerals are worldless, and then at the very end you've been speaking about minerals and artificial intelligence in Latourian kind of way. So I'm wondering whether you think that Heidegger would say that minerals are worldless, these days?
That's a good question, because what Martin Heidegger didn't predict is that artificial intelligence, if you sum it up very roughly, it's rare minerals which are constitutive of the computer, of any computer, but informed by language, actually. And this he could not predict, actually, obviously, in the 1930s or 50s. So we are living in a strange world where actually the word stone and the word language are actually connected, you know, and at the everyday level. And it's unprecedented, of course. So I think that the world we're living in is constituted of these new types of alliances, actually, that we have to think more carefully, because it's totally new. We don't have the distance at some point to rethink our relationships to animals, to vegetables, to minerals, to the atmosphere, to the... it should be reconsidered, because the automated life of today obliges us to, in a way. We have to make a new agreement with all the non-humans, I would say. Especially the ones who speak like stones now.
Nicolas, thank you very much for a very inspiring lecture. And yeah, since we were talking a lot about AI and about the tool and the agent and the relation in between those dimensions, I want to drop this very problematic question that disturbs me personally a lot. What's consciousness? How you would describe it?
That's a... Thank you, Jura, for this great question that would need at least 1 hour. But I would... maybe the best way to answer, and that's maybe the core of what I think about consciousness. I could, of course, develop that, and we would need to analyze different definitions of it. But spontaneously, I'm coming back to the notion of projection, actually. I think consciousness is projection, in a way, and it's based on the act of projecting yourself into the world. It's not so far from what Jean-Paul Sartre was saying in the 40s about being and nothingness in English, l'être et le néant. Well, but this notion of projection is fundamental, and it's what matches with art also, in a way. So this is obviously a concept I should develop a bit more, because I think it's really obsessing me at the moment. But yeah, mainly our consciousness is a huge movie projector. Actually, think about the cave of Plato, for example. No? You just see the shadows of the real reality which is outside, etc., etc. That's another screen with shadows projecting on the screen. So that I would, if I had to define consciousness, but please spare me, I would start with the notion of projection. I don't know what you think, but I don't believe that there's an essence. You see what I mean? I think it's a mechanism. It's really something that we learn to configure and activate. Sorry, I didn't.
So it's a projection and a receiver at the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe I can just follow up quickly to play the ball. So how do you define authorship? Do we even need authorship in the sense as we considered in art?
That's a very contemporary question, actually. And I read last November in the magazine Art Review an interview with several artists, Matt Dryhurst, Every Singer, and a few others, and they were all actually agreeing upon the fact that this notion is completely obsolete. Because actually they are stolen every day by artificial intelligence, actually, which recycles their works all the time. So property, copyright, might not be actually a possible position today, because it's useless. Actually, it's a perpetual theft. So why not concentrate on something more important? And one of the artists in question, I think it's Matt Dryhurst, was saying, well, I'm an artist not because of my production. It's not about producing objects. It's about my protocol. It's about my way of doing art. It's about the set of rules and practices that I constituted as an artist. And actually, that's exactly what I think about art. That's always more interesting. What interests me the more is not to see an object. It's from this object reconstituting the chain of thought and projections, again, that the artist created. That's very more interesting. I would say, to sum it up and make you understand what I mean, if you see the image of a movie, actually, in a magazine or in a movie theater or whatever, you see this image, and this image can have a great aesthetic quality. It could be a fantastic image, but still, what matters? It's the film. You just have an introduction to the film. So my job, I would say, is to understand the film, the movie, not being blocked on the image. It's like the difference between a dot and a line, I would say. So copyright doesn't work anymore. Let's consider the line, not the dots.
And what about intentionality then? I think the 20th century art was also a lot based on the artist's intentionality. That's something
against historization, generally, no? Not intentionality. I'm not sure it really evolved, actually, in a way. I think it's quite a stable, value.
I was just meaning more in the sense that if we are more, let's say, I don't know, going to the object-oriented ontology or Osborne-Lecter theory, then maybe the way the things were intended by somebody who created is no more as important as it used to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that, actually. Maybe not as an authorship, but, what's an author, actually? It's someone, and that's what we all are, in a way. Actually, we could define ourselves like this. We concentrate a certain amount of ideas, principles, values, protocols, depending on what we are doing in life. And we are just the name of this ensemble of things, actually. And that's nothing more than that. It's an aggregate of different dispositions which are constructed together, which constitute more or less, interesting ensemble. But it's not exactly intentionality, it's not exactly the author, but it looks like it.
Yeah, I think that brings me back that you kind of overcome these questions by the notion of the relationality that is very crucial in your work for me, that somehow bypass this problem in the same sense as Heidegger bypassed the problem of the subject-object, right? By focusing on a certain, but anyway, that's maybe too abstract. Any other questions, please? Maybe also in the back rows, we have people with microphones there. Please don't be hesitant to raise your hands. Any questions can be also questions out of this complicated context that we just developed here.
Thank you. I was thinking, like when I was listening to you, how, because it felt to me, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I just want to confirm whether I'm wrong or not, that the way how you view the mission of art today in, you know, all the AI and technologies, that the mission is actually very strongly social and also political. That it can really become that art can be the village, just, you know, spreading of just building connections, bondages, and also actually keeping the diversity growing in perhaps also some opposition to the strongly totalistic waves which are rising. So for me it felt very strongly political and social.
I must admit you're right. No, I was maybe brought up, carried away by Élisée Reclus and Kupka, and I have to admit that this speech was very, very political also. But because art is actually, it's not, it's autonomous, okay, but it's belonging to a set of relationships that structure the socius, actually, the societies we're living in. So it's neither completely alone, nor completely melted into something else, but it carries values, and the main value for me, that's why I'm insisting on this, is diversity. Because when you look at an artwork, you see the world through the eyes, through the glasses of someone who's completely different than you, actually. It's a lesson of tolerance, first, even if you don't understand it. No. It provides this, actually, obviously. So that's political, also.
I'm thankful for that, thank you.
I think it was a very important sentence that you just said, even for our context nowadays. I think we are experiencing this every day, the fear the art can raise in people, just because they are not ready to accept.
Well, me a little bit less at the moment, because I'm freelance at the moment, so. But I'm praying for you every day, Michal.
Okay, I think we're heading towards the end, but maybe still some last voices.
We can go on outside.
Okay, we can also leave this for the after the small talk. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone to go through this very dense evening tonight, and hope to see you soon at other events of National Gallery. And
Thank you very much to all of you.